Greetings, brothers and sisters. So I'm going to get to Bob Saget's autopsy. A couple of my viewers sent me his autopsy on Facebook, and there's significant developments, things I haven't reported on, plus a weird tie to that Heather McDonald comedian who also fell. And so they have a similar, I mean, it's just, I got to show you. So it's kind of significant. I mean, it's more information. And each time we get more information, the story gets more unbelievable, right? And so this is, I'm going to go through this stuff. Somebody sent me this from Britney Spears, right? And she, my cat Wampus is in here today, and she's coming over here, interfering with my video making process. But this is another example of Britney Spears just being like a child.
This is the most beautiful experience I'll ever experience in my life. This is fudge. And it's heated up fudge.
It's heated up fudge? I wish there was a name for that, like something like warm fudge or heated up fudge. Like if I go to an ice cream shop and say, could I have some warm fudge on my sundae, please?
So it's hot.
Oh, it's hot fudge, yeah. Like, it's hard to believe that this isn't an act, but I think she's just reverts to these childlike states.
And it's the most beautiful experience you'll ever experience when you actually eat this fudge.
I hope she's acting, but I don't think she is. Who knows, Who knows with Britney?
Thank you, Jesus, for food.
You got to thank Jesus for hot fudge. So aside from that, I saw an article from New York Post, taking forever for this thing to load. This is 13 seconds of me in heels before I dyed my hair purple. This is a tease with the devil emoji of what's to come. My song Get Naked. Hope you guys are having a great day. Psst. No hair and makeup. Just playing around, folks. Okay. She's whipping her hair over. She's in some sort of bikini-like outfit. She's in heels, wrecking that hardwood floor. And then she's going to do that because that's what Britney do. Paris Hilton, so hot. Gabrielle Ascano, I don't know who that is. Wow, it's giving Britney Y2K. It's giving Britney Y2K, we love you, queen. And then other stuff here. So this is Antonio Brown, AB. We the owners now. Donda, this is Kanye West's mom is Donda. It has to do with him. Donda is about ownership. They have a sports department that Kanye has put Antonio Brown in charge of because, Kanye. Donda is about ownership, empowerment, and discovering next superheroes. This is for people who counted us out, for everyone who said we can't. Say we will. As president, it was important to me to book the Donda suite for years. Superville, whatever, if it's that 56. This is a game meant to be watched together. This is the love and unity we need to push. This is for the kids of our next generation. We will be hosting community events this weekend, inviting kids with their families to the game. Let's give people the Donda experience. It's a family affair, Donda Sports. And they paid $2 million for an 18 people owner suite. So think about that, right? $2 million to go to the Super Bowl. And then for front row lower VIP tickets, 6 people are $32,000 a piece, $195,000 total. And so this is what they spent, $2 million and basically $200,000 for Super Bowl tickets. And wow, like that's just extravagant. Okay, so one of my viewers sent me this, and I used to review these things all the time. And yes, they're going full ghoul at some haunt couture, haunt day couture. I don't know. Don't tell me. Don't care. Don't need to know. In fact, I made a mistake in when I made the video for Nightmare Alley, and I said that um, the director was Benicio del Toro, and that's the actor who I know who that is. And I got 50 comments from people telling me, no, this is the real person. I've said this over and over again, and they'll be coming in forever. And some of the people have never watched my videos, so I mean they suck too, but that's fine. They don't know the policy that I have, right? So but they still suck, right? But anyways, I have a good memory. Like when I was in school, if I just paid attention in class, I would remember enough to, I would remember pretty much everything. And I've always had a good memory. Now, as I've gotten older, it's not so great. And I haven't been great with names. And sometimes, like, I could just see a name and forget about it a little while later. After I had COVID, it even got kind of worse, but it's gotten better. But for example, when I was making this video, I looked up Bradley Cooper's name because I knew when I was telling the narrative that if you saw Bradley Cooper's face and there was the images in the beginning of the movie, that it would be important in terms of being able to visualize what I was saying as I was describing the story, right? I went back and looked up William Dafoe's name because I thought the same thing, right? It was important for you guys to know who I was talking about. But when I said Benicio del Toro, again, I know who the actor is, and I don't know what the director's name is. I've already forgotten it, even though I got 50 comments, which just proves my point. It doesn't matter if you correct me. I'm not going to remember. Like, I have a, pretty good memory. So much of my videos come from memory. And, I'm just like, there's important points that I'm making in the videos, and a lot of the details aren't all that important. And if I get some wrong, I mean, you're going to get things wrong eventually, right? But if you heard Benicio del Toro and you knew I was wrong, then you knew what I meant, right? And if you didn't, all you had to do was have basic search engine skills. And if you don't have search engine skills, then you shouldn't be on my channel, right? You could look up the director of Nightmare Alley and find out who it was. And so it shouldn't have involved me at all. My policy is always, don't tell me, don't care, don't need to know. And I can't correct it after I've said it. It's already on the video. It's just a small mistake. And if you know what I'm saying, then there's no reason to correct me unless you're a real douche, right? Let's say I say the wrong word, but you can tell from the context of the sentence what I meant. There's no reason to correct me because, again, I can't fix it in the video, and it's usually not that important. I talk for hours each day. I make about 2 hours of content and then all the editing and things that go into it. And sometimes I'm going to make mistakes. And I did this years ago, and I was over this kind of process when I called Michael McKean Christopher Guest in a Full House video in 2015. And I received over a period of years like 200 or so comments and, people correcting me. And if you're correcting me or somebody else, there's 3 reasons for it, especially in this case, the way that this is, I'm describing it here. Number 1, you want to be, tell everyone, show everyone that you know more, that you're the teacher's pet and that you're right or whatever it is, right? The other thing is you like to point out other people's mistakes. And with all this, you have some obsessive compulsive need to say something, even though I've said over and over again, you know what my policy is, that I don't want to know. I don't, and if I did, I'd want 1 comment and not 50. And they're still coming in, I'm sure. Like, I'll be banning people for a while because I ban people for those reasons. It's selfish, it's narcissistic, and it's, hard on me. And I said over and over again, I have to save my eyes. It's just a waste of my time. And like, I've already forgotten all of the comments. Like, I don't remember the guy's real name because, I don't need to. Like, I could look it up, sure. And I recognize the guy's work because I've seen a couple of his other movies. But I'm going to make mistakes just like anybody else. And your need to point them out, are you pointing out everything that I do right? And again, I'm not taking the mistake personally because I know I make mistakes like this. It's not like I'm, I think I'm perfect because I don't, right? I'm sometimes a slacker and can do sloppy work, and this is a part of that. It's just that dealing with people like that who need to point out all the mistakes but don't point out all the things I've gotten right, the important things in the videos over the years, right? Like my batting average is in the high 90%. Like if your batting average in baseball, if you hit 400, it's like a miracle season. It's only been done like a couple of times or one time. Ted Williams or something like that. And that was years ago. And so like basketball shooting above 50% is, a great percentage, in terms of a quarterback's completion ratio, it's something like 60, 70% is considered good, right? And so, in terms of what I do here, I'm right a lot. And the more important points that I make are things that, again, you don't need to praise me or, pat me on the back, but certainly it says something about you if you're not, seeing all the good things that are in that video and you're pointing out one small mistake, right? For whatever reason that you have, and it's not helpful. Don't think you're doing me or anybody else a service. Like if it's something like a misspelled word in the title, I encourage people to tell me, not in a dickish way, because I have people say, well, you're college educated, you misspelled this, like they have to demean you. Just shows you like, how bad they suck, right? But it's very helpful when I make a mistake in the title. My wife does it all the time. She'll tell me and I can correct it. I want to correct it because I can correct it. But I can't change the video, and I've already moved on from the video. So now you're just burdening me with a bunch of worthless comments that really have no value in any sphere, right? And while we're on the subject, if there is, if you say something like where your sentence starts with, you forgot to say something, that's a bannable offense to me. Because, again, you're assuming that I made a mistake or I didn't choose to put something in because I can't say everything every time. If I've said it in other videos, like I have things that I actually sort of broke the story, and then other people are saying, hey, maybe you don't know this, but, well, no, you probably heard it from me, right? But I don't say it in every video I make on the subject, and I'm not going to do that. And so, there's just a level of annoyance that goes with that. If you have something to offer, starting the sentence with you forgot something makes it sound like I, failed in some way. It's, insulting. Again, like I don't get insulted, but like I'm like, oh, this person's going to be a problem, so I'll nip it in the bud and ban them now, right? But if you phrased it like, by the way, or whatever it is, and maybe not even address it to me. It just, say whatever you have to say. But you don't have to bring it in to me like I forgot something, which you don't know whether I did or not. You don't know why I didn't put it in the video. You're assuming I forgot or I didn't know. I see, it was 120,000 comments this past year. In other years, it was well over 200,000 when I made more videos instead of putting all these videos together into one. So just, be aware of these things, right? Like I don't need to know. Other people don't need to know. Just think about people in a considerate way. We're out here making content which you're enjoying. And so why be a douche? Why burden people with your suckiness, right? Keep your suckiness to yourself. It's not welcome here. I've said it over and over again. So let's go back to this ghoul fest here. You can see, wow, look at that. They're making these girls look ghoulish on purpose. And it's a very, see the shadows there. It's a very distinct theme, right? So they've taken some way of putting the shoulders up around above the women's ears. And I think that they've elongated the arms here. Well, they have because, they're wearing they've got these talons. So it's just off the charts creepy. It's pretentious. It doesn't serve a purpose. They got the girls all ghouled up. They're walking with their arms straight. Just unnecessary. And they do this all the time. This woman here, like she's got some kind of, 1970s shaft jacket here. And like it's just, this thing's above her head, right? Uncomfortable, weird looking. And they've just, these models, the model industry is, especially these runway models, but the fashion industry is even worse and more demonic and Illuminati and Eyes Wide Shut than than Hollywood. And these girls are just, they starve themselves and they're half dead. They don't enjoy their lives. And, just to walk on stage and wear something like this, to people who will call this art and call it interesting, and you think about the extravagance and the waste of money and just the creepiness of the thing. And you can see how rigid this is. I mean, this isn't for sale. This is just this pretentious stuff they do as a way to, it's just, it's a weird industry, right? And it's ghoulish and zombie-ish. These girls are, look at this girl. She looks like a zombie. This makeup and the lipstick and just all of it, right? And so that's the fashion industry. Okay, so as we get into the autopsy here, I want to say that, when you don't believe the official story and they're speculating, because there's some speculation here, which I'll get into, then you're going to come up with your own explanation. But you got to remember that you're also speculating. All of us are suspicious of anybody who dies after making, a certain choice, that they died of that choice, right? There's all those people who, many of us who are suspicious of such things, but it doesn't mean it's fact or it actually happened. We can just speculate ourselves, right? Based on the evidence and, our personal lens in which we see the world. And so here we go. We have Robert Saget, and this is the manner of death accident, right? In January 9th, 2022. And so, first of all, from all we know so far and what was going to be revealed here, calling it an accident is highly suspicious. And I'll get into that more in just a second. And so the abrasion of the posterior scalp, so this is on the back of the head, right, somewhere underneath his hairline, subgeal hemorrhage underlying the abrasion of the posterior scalp. So there was some hemorrhaging and bleeding from where he hit his head, the back of his head. That's the official story. Linear fracture of the base of the skull involving the right occipital bone and the right temporal bone. So we saw this with Sanjay Gupta, right? So there's going to be something to do with his frontal lobe, which is going to be right here. We'll come back to that. Here's the occipital bone right back in the base of the skull. And here's the temporal bone up here. So they're saying he hit his head here, and there was a fracture running from the occipital bone to the temporal bone, and then they're going to talk about fractures up here as well. So this is a severe head injury, right? Committed fractures of the roof of the eye orbits involving the bilateral frontal bone. So that's here again, these occipital bone. So there was a fracture that ran from here all the way up to the eyes, right? From the occipital bone up to the bones around the eyes, the orbital bones around the eyes. And so for him to hit his head and then go back to sleep or go to sleep like nothing happened, and to have cracks in his skull from the back to the front seems highly suspicious, right? So then there's this phrase, bilateral partial preorbital ecchymosis. And so I had to look that up. And I didn't want to, but I did anyway. And so what that is also known as raccoon eye, right? It's known as raccoon eye. And here's the images. And as luck would have it, one of my viewers sent me this, that Heather McDonald also had some raccoon eyes, right? So we'll get back to that in just a moment. But that seems very strange, right? Now another comedian, she falls on the stage, hits her head, the back of her head, it bounces off the stage, and she comes up with raccoon eyes, panda eyes, right? And so subdural hematoma, this was all the bleeding and blood on the brain. We've talked about this before, these two terms. And then contracoup contusions involving the bilateral frontal lobes and bilateral temporal lobes. So what they're saying there is that right here is where the lobes of the brain are, that there was contusions, that when he hit his head, the front of his brain banged into the front of his skull, and there was contusions on the brain, the frontal lobe, and there would have been frontal lobe damage, which is severe head injury, right? Getting frontal lobe damage, when you hit the back of your head, you have frontal lobe damage. That causes all kinds of psychological issues, and your frontal lobe is very important. It's like what separates us from the apes, right? And so this is all very severe head injury. So let's get back to Heather McDonald. So she's showing off her purple eyes, right? Her raccoon eyes, her panda eyes. And here's a better view of this thing. It almost looks like it's painted on. And so I talked about how her fall was believable because of the way she hit the back of her head. When Wendy Williams, remember when Wendy Williams passed out? Guys remember that. I'm not going to show that here, but it looked really fake. And this looked really fake up until the point where she hit the back of her head. And then I was like, well, maybe she did that on purpose, but it was, she smacked the back of her head. Let's move over to that part. Let me make this bigger here. So she says that stuff about Jesus loves her more, and then, some bad jokes, not a good comedian. And then this weird sort of staggering, and then slam. You can see her head whips back against the stage. Here, I'll slow it down here. You see she's like, looks odd. She's staggering, and then, she falls here, and then her head, you see her head whipping down, and bam, right? That popped, and that bounced off the stage. If she did that on purpose, then, she didn't mean to do that part. And so, that's a severe, head injury. And I don't think Bob Saget would have been in his hotel room capable of something like this. And we'll come back to that because you really can't call this a coincidence. It's got to be planned in some way, either a divine plan or, something to do with the controllers. I don't know which. I can't say. But for a comedian, they both sort of sucky comedians. And, she's getting her name out there. I didn't know who she was. So this is going to help her career out. There's nothing wrong with what happened here for her. I mean, she did suffer whatever she suffered. Or, maybe it's fake in some way, but her head did bounce off the stage. But for her to have this, and then a couple days later, the autopsy comes out, and we found out that Bob Saget had purple eyes too, and you're like, oh, this is good how it happened. He fell down like she did, and but she was knocked unconscious when she fell down. They're saying that Bob Saget banged his head, thought nothing of it, and went to sleep and died. But if, he hit his head as hard as she did, and she didn't have any hemorrhaging, she didn't have any frontal lobe damage. So as hard as she hits her head here, Bob Saget's was worse, right? Bob Saget in a hotel room was worse. So we'll come back to all that. I want to, restate this at the end here. So we know that there was the cardiovascular issues where his heart seemed to be only partially functioning, and there seemed to be a lot of blockage. And we know from, other symptoms related to choices he made or a choice he made that, this is consistent with those things. And so there's a possibility that they came in and took a tire iron to his head after he was dead to cover up for some other type of whatever it is, right? That's possible. I'm not saying it's true. And so here's the conclusion. In consideration of the circumstances surrounding the death and after the examination of the body, toxicology analysis, microscopic analysis, respiratory pathogen panel testing, bilateral lung cultures, and postmortem CT, CAT scan, it is my opinion that the death of Robert Saget, a 65-year-old white male found unresponsive in a hotel room, is the result of blunt head trauma. It is most probable, and again, we've heard this sentence before, that the decedent suffered an unwitnessed fall backwards and struck the posterior aspect of his head. The manner of death is an accident. So when he came in with, these kind of panda eyes, right, came in with these, purple eyes or whatever, from, this is what they would have seen when they brought him in for the autopsy. And so for these guys to come and immediately say it's an accident, when clearly There was a head injury involved. He had black eyes, which could have been from being punched in the face. I mean, they didn't know. They hadn't examined his skull and all these things. And he came in the way he did. They immediately said, oh, there's no foul play, right? Without really, all this information. There's a ton of information here that all would suggest foul play. But they said no drugs and alcohol, no foul play. And yet it took them a month to come up with all this information. And it also says here, it goes through some of the things that he has. The right lateral eye has adjacent focal purple, whatever that word is. The medial left eye has adjacent frontal purple, this word here, which means both eyes were purple when they came in, right? And so you would think maybe someone broke his nose this is how you get black eyes getting hit in the nose or that area. And so without any examination, they said, no, it's an accident, right? The guy comes in there with purple eyes, no foul play, it's an accident. He died in his sleep. This is the way he came in, right? And it says here, there is abrasion on the posterior scalp, centered 2 inches below the top of the head and 1 inch right of the posterior midline. Underlying the abrasion is a focal subgeal hemorrhage, and then, goes into all these things with him bleeding, right? And so there's stuff with his cardiovascular system. It says here approximately 100 milliliters of liquid and partial clotted subdural blood is around the cerebral convexities of the cerebellum. So they found 100 liters of blood inside his skull that was just, putting pressure on his brain, which they think brought about his death. This isn't going to change anything, right? Like nothing I say here. This is a dead issue. I'd be surprised if anything more comes of this. The family isn't pushing for more information. The media look pretty suspicious, but they're not, calling BS on this thing. So it's basically over. And it's just, our curiosity or our interpretation. But if you look at all of these things that they write here, this would be considered gathering data and the scientific aspect of the autopsy, right? All these things that they say here, and then a bunch of, observations and collecting of data here about what went on with him, a reporting of his body and what was going on physically. And the way the science should work, if any other coroner gave Bob Saget an autopsy, they come up with basically the same information up here, right? All this information, and then the specific information right here that's on the top of the autopsy, and then the rest of it. And then in the conclusion, this was what they would say. Basically the same thing as this guy said. But then the last part here, this is based in speculation. It is most probable that the decedent suffered an unwitnessed fall backwards. Again, unwitnessed, so there isn't any confirmation. And if they don't have any video in the room, like some sort of video, then they don't know for sure, right? It's probable. And struck the posterior aspect of his head. The manner of death is an accident. Well, all this information up here would suggest otherwise. And they called it right when they got the body. Like they said immediately, no foul play. It's okay. Everything's fine here. And, if they said the guy's head's all effed up and he died of a blow to the back of the head back then, it would have sounded pretty fishy, right? And so this, him saying it's probable, is based in his interpretation of all of this scientific data. And again, that's each coroner, and all of us have the ability to, some of us know more than others. Like some of these terms are completely foreign to me. I'm not a medical person. But again, we've seen the official story, and a lot of things that have happened with coroners there's been a lot of cover-up for a number of years, and, most recently. And the way that they're categorizing death. One person left a comment and said, well, I thought all deaths where somebody died with COVID are COVID deaths, right? Do they, when someone died of COVID, even though they had multiple other comorbidities, COVID was the main cause of death. And so the last part is speculation. It's his best guess or his compromised guess. Now I have my cat Wampus and my two puppies, they go nuts when Wampus, especially Tulsi. Whenever Wampus comes, Wampus gets them all the time. Like she, especially in the winter, she doesn't like to go outside. And she hides and she just runs up and jumps on him. And then when she comes down, we're watching TV and she'll jump up on my lap or, my wife or whatever next to us. The puppies go crazy, but they're a little bit hesitant to. Anyways, so that's what's going on in my head. And so if you look at, what he's saying here, that's a speculation. And so what they do know is he died in his bed. And so at some point that night, in the last, period of time after he left the comedy club when people were there to witness him, he hit his head, right? And so if he didn't hit his head outside the hotel room, that means his head was hit somehow. He got all this damage, the scientific evidence that happened to his head and his brain. Again, what they're saying here is the back of his head was hit that caused fractures going all the way up to his orbital bones, which caused his eyes to get, purpled eyes, discoloration. So the force of the blow traveled through his skull into his eyes, right, causing his eyes to get black eyes. And, we know with Heather McDonald, we see her head slam into a hard floor, and she suffered some, fractured skull, but she was knocked unconscious, right? They had to drag her out of there. They had to get her out of there. And she was, brought to a hospital, and she didn't suffer nearly what Bob Saget did. Her brain wasn't hemorrhaging. She doesn't have frontal lobe damage, right? And so she has some of the symptoms, but she had a severe fall. And how does Bob Saget have a fall like that in a hotel room? The floor would be carpeted, which would, buffer his fall. She fell on a hard surface, just like you see with basketball players all the time. And, she got a concussion and was knocked unconscious. So you would say that the kind of fall that he had, the kind of damage he suffered would have knocked him unconscious, right? He would have been knocked out. And that would mean he wouldn't call his wife. He wouldn't, he gets into bed and crawls under the covers and his brain is bleeding and he dies. Seems like a huge stretch, right? And again, maybe it's possible that happened, but it isn't a fact, right? It's, what the coroner wrote down and it's being accepted. And, like I said, this isn't going to change. People aren't asking questions. And what we say or people being suspicious isn't going to change anything. I say this time and time again. And, if there's some sort of foul play involved, whatever that means, some sort of cover-up, then they're going to push this thing through and the media isn't going to, question it. But, the rest of us, it looks really fishy because his fall was worse based in the damage he suffered than Heather McDonald and all these basketball players that get undercut and their head bounces off the basketball floor, right? And so maybe he could have fell in the tub, but, how does that work? They usually have those plastic inserts. This might have been, some sort of expensive hotel room. But what was in the hotel room that he could have hit his head on in this way? How would he have fallen in that direction? Did he faint? Did he pass out? Is that what caused the fall? And if that happened, wouldn't he, mention this to his wife? He was somebody who was worried and on various types of medications, right? He was on a, whatever that medication, clozapam or whatever it was, for anxiety. And again, if I didn't get the name right, don't tell me. It is, it is whatever it is. Like you can look it up. But, there just seems like not believable. The more we find out about it, the more it seems unbelievable. And the fact that Heather, McDonald, who's like the same level of comedian as Bob Saget, a non-funny comedian, who now has, some national presence, it's like Bob Saget's, crappy career was transferred onto her because she'll be remembered for this. And what happened to her 2 days before they released the autopsy, it just seems sketchy and fishy and just, not believable. And again, the way that they said this, and Sanjay Gupta said it in my last video, you can go back and watch that, when Sanjay Gupta busted out his skull, he said it originally sounded like he bumped his head, and then this, some sort of hematoma, some sort of brain bleed happened, but there was frontal lobe damage. His brain was sloshing around back there. There was bleeding in the base of his skull. There was, damage to the front of his brain. There was black eyes and a fracture that ran along the whole skull all the way up to the orbital bones. I mean, this was a severe blow, like not something where, he tripped and fell and hit the back of his head. And then, he would have been knocked unconscious, had a concussion, and would have been, whatever it was. And him crawling into bed, I bumped my head, I got a boo-boo. And he went to sleep, we woke up, and he was dead. That was how they presented this. And certainly they shouldn't have ruled out foul play, right? Because clearly they don't have enough evidence to support that, that thesis. Only spirituality will save this world. It's Paul Romano, definitely reporting to the Apocalaughs and the Ascension. Everyone have a blessed day and be grateful.